The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 11 times, each note echoing through the sprawling Victorian mansion like a countdown to destiny. Jake Morrison stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his grandfather's study, watching the morning light dance across the manicured gardens of the Connecticut estate, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. At 28, Jake had everything the American dream promised: a tech empire worth $47 million, a penthouse overlooking Central Park, and a life so perfectly orchestrated that even his morning coffee was scheduled. He'd built his fortune creating software that connected people across the globe, yet he'd never felt more disconnected from his own heart. "Jake, my boy." Harold Morrison's voice boomed from the marble foyer below. "The catering folks are here. Come meet the angel who's going to save us from my cooking." Jake chuckled, straightening his navy cashmere sweater. 3 months ago, he'd reluctantly agreed to stay with his 78-year-old grandfather after Harold's latest culinary adventure had involved the fire department and a very patient insurance adjuster. Tonight's dinner party for the Millbrook Historical Society was Harold's chance to prove he could still host elegant gatherings, with professional help, of course. "Coming, Grandpa," Jake called, jogging down the grand staircase with its hand-carved banister that had welcomed Morrison family members for over a century. He rounded the corner into the foyer and stopped breathing. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the golden morning light, was the most captivating woman he'd ever seen. Platinum blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves past her shoulders, catching the sunlight like spun silk. She wore a crisp white chef's coat that somehow managed to look both professional and effortlessly elegant. And when she turned to face him, her sapphire blue eyes met his with an intensity that sent his heart into overdrive. Time crystallized into that single moment, the way her lips parted slightly in surprise, the way her fingers tightened on the handle of her silver equipment case, the way the morning light seemed to bend around her like she was the center of the universe. "You must be Jake," she said, her voice like warm velvet with just a hint of breathlessness. "I'm Chloe Bennett from Bennett's Catering. Your grandfather has told me so much about you." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. This was ridiculous. He'd negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, given presentations to Fortune 500 CEOs, and had never been at a loss for words. But standing before this woman, Chloe, he felt like a teenager experiencing his first crush. Yes, I'm Jake," he finally managed, his voice rougher than usual. It's really nice to meet you." When she smiled, Jake's world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just a polite, professional smile. It was genuine, warm, and lit up her entire face. Her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, and he noticed a tiny dimple in her left cheek that made him want to reach out and touch it. "Well, don't just stand there gawking, boy." Harold chuckled, appearing beside them with his characteristic lack of subtlety. "Help the lady with her equipment. Chloe, my dear, this is my grandson I was telling you about. Made his fortune in computers, owns half of Manhattan, and is tragically single." "Grandpa," Jake groaned, his face burning as he stepped forward to take Chloe's equipment case. When their fingers brushed during the handoff, an electric current shot through him so intense he nearly dropped the case. Chloe's eyes widened, and he saw her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, and he knew, absolutely knew, that she'd felt it too. "So," Harold continued, oblivious to the romantic thunderbolt that had just struck his foyer, "what do you think of our Jake, Chloe? Handsome devil, isn't he? Great breeding stock, excellent financial prospects." "I think," Chloe interrupted with a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles, "that he's going to be very helpful today." She looked directly at Jake, and he felt like he was drowning in the ocean of her eyes. "That is, if you don't mind helping me transform your dining room into something magical." "I'd love to," Jake said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. "I mean, I'd be happy to help, with whatever you need." "Wonderful," she said, and when she smiled again, Jake thought his heart might actually stop. "I should warn you, though, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I tend to get very focused when I'm working. That's funny, Jake said, finding his confidence returning as he gazed into her eyes. So am I. I have a feeling we're going to work very well together. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibilities and the sweet tension of new attraction. Harold cleared his throat loudly, breaking the spell. Well then, you two lovebirds better get started. We have 24 of Millbrook's most distinguished citizens arriving at 7, and I promised them a dinner party they'd never forget. As Jake led Chloe toward the dining room, carrying her equipment and trying not to stare at the graceful way she moved, he couldn't help but smile. He'd come to Millbrook thinking he was just helping his grandfather through a rough patch. Instead, he'd just met the woman who was going to change everything. So, Chloe said as they entered the elegant dining room with its mahogany table that could seat 30 and crystal chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the silk wallpaper. Tell me about this dinner party. What's the occasion? The Historical Society's annual fundraiser, Jake explained, setting down her case near the ornate sideboard. Grandpa's been a member for 40 years. These people are like family to him. That's sweet, Chloe said, and Jake noticed how her expression softened. Family is important. Do you have a big family? Jake asked, genuinely curious about every detail of her life. Just me and my mom, actually. She raised me by herself after my dad passed when I was young. Chloe's voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake caught the hint of vulnerability underneath. She's the one who taught me to cook. Said food was love made visible. That's beautiful, Jake said softly. And true. The best meals I've ever had weren't at 5-star restaurants. They were at my grandpa's kitchen table. When Chloe looked at him then, really looked at him, Jake felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just attraction. This was recognition. Like his soul had been waiting his entire life for this moment. This woman, this feeling of coming home. I have a confession, she said, her cheeks turning the most adorable shade of pink. I was nervous about today. Big mansion, wealthy family, fancy dinner party. It's not exactly my usual clientele. Well, I have a confession too, Jake said, stepping closer without even realizing it. I haven't been able to think about anything but this dinner party since Grandpa booked you. And now I know why. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I was supposed to meet you today. I can feel it. The dining room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Chloe's eyes searched his face, and Jake held his breath, waiting for her to laugh or step away or tell him he was crazy. Instead, she smiled, a soft, wondering smile that made his heart race. I can feel it too, she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by centuries of Morrison family history and the promise of an evening that would bring together 24 of Millbrook's finest citizens, Jake Morrison fell completely, irrevocably, and magnificently in love. The grandfather clock chimed noon as Jake found himself in the most unusual position of his adult life, standing in his grandfather's kitchen, completely mesmerized by a woman making pasta from scratch. Chloe's hands moved with the grace of a pianist, kneading the golden dough with a rhythm that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. You're staring, she said without looking up, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I'm observing, Jake corrected, leaning against the marble counter. There's a difference. Uh-huh. Chloe glanced at him, her blue eyes sparkling with mischief. And what exactly are you observing, Mr. Morrison? The way the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window caught the gold in her hair. The way she bit her lower lip when she concentrated. The way his name sounded like music when she said it. I'm observing that you're incredibly talented, he said instead, which was also completely true. Flattery will get you everywhere, she laughed, dusting flour from her hands. Want to help, or are you just going to stand there being tall, dark, and handsome? Jake's heart did a little flip. Did you just call me handsome? I called you tall, dark, and handsome. There's a difference, she said, echoing his earlier words with a grin that made his knees weak. Touché. Jake rolled up the sleeves of his cashmere sweater. "What can I do?" "Can you handle a knife?" Chloe asked, then immediately blushed. "I mean, for cooking, obviously." "I think I can manage not to injure myself," Jake said, moving to stand beside her. The kitchen suddenly felt much smaller with both of them in it. "What are we making?" "Herb-crusted salmon with lemon risotto, roasted vegetables, and a mixed green salad with pomegranate vinaigrette." Chloe began arranging ingredients on the counter with practiced efficiency. "Your grandfather requested something fancy, but not too fancy for his friends." "That sounds perfect." Jake watched her work, fascinated by her confidence and skill. "How long have you been cooking?" "Since I was 7, Chloe said, handing him a cutting board and a chef's knife. "My mom worked 2 jobs, so I learned to cook dinner for us. Started with mac and cheese from a box, graduated to, well, this." She gestured around the kitchen, which looked like a scene from a gourmet cooking show. Fresh herbs were arranged in neat piles. Vegetables were perfectly organized by color and size, and the whole space smelled like heaven. "That's incredible," Jake said, genuinely impressed. "Building something from nothing, creating something beautiful with your own hands. I understand that feeling." "Do you?" Chloe asked, looking at him with new interest. "I mean, no offense, but you're a tech millionaire. Isn't your world all about, I don't know, algorithms and computer code?" Jake laughed, starting to dice the onions with surprising skill. "You'd be surprised. Creating software is a lot like cooking, actually. You take individual ingredients, lines of code, and combine them in just the right way to create something that feeds people. Maybe not their bodies, but their need to connect, to share, to feel less alone." Chloe paused in her prep work, studying his face. That's actually beautiful. I never thought of it that way." "Most people don't," Jake said, meeting her gaze. "They see dollar signs and think that's all there is to it. But the money was never the point. The point was creating something that mattered." "And does it? Matter, I mean?" Jake considered the question as he continued chopping. "My software has connected over 50 million people worldwide. It's helped long-distance relationships survive, helped families stay in touch, helped people find their communities. So yeah, I think it matters. But lately, Chloe prompted gently. "Lately, I've been wondering if I've been so focused on connecting other people that I forgot to connect with anyone myself." The kitchen fell quiet except for the rhythmic sound of chopping and the gentle bubbling of the stock simmering on the stove. Jake couldn't believe he'd just admitted that to a woman he'd known for less than 2 hours. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. Don't apologize," Chloe interrupted, her voice soft. "I understand that feeling. When you spend all your time creating beautiful experiences for other people, sometimes you forget to create them for yourself." Jake looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that now familiar flutter in his chest. "Is that what you do? Create beautiful experiences?" "I try to," Chloe said, turning back to the stove. "Every meal is an opportunity to make someone feel special, to create a memory. Food is love made visible, remember? Your mom sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Chloe's voice grew quiet. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." "I'm so sorry," Jake said, instinctively reaching out to touch her shoulder. The contact sent electricity through both of them, and they stood frozen for a moment, aware of how close they were standing. "Thank you," Chloe whispered, not pulling away. She would have loved this, seeing me cook in a kitchen like this, for people who appreciate good food. "She would have been proud of you," Jake said, his voice rougher than usual. "You're incredible at what you do." Chloe turned to face him, and suddenly they were standing mere inches apart. Jake could see the flecks of gold in her blue eyes, could smell her perfume mixed with the herbs and spices surrounding them. "Jake," she said softly, and he thought she might be about to say something important, when Harold's voice boomed through the kitchen. "How are my favorite lovebirds doing in here?" They sprang apart like teenagers caught by their parents, both of them flushed and breathless. "We're not," Jake started. Just cooking, Mr. Morrison, Chloe finished, her cheeks pink. Harold appeared in the doorway, grinning like the cat that caught the canary. Of course you are. That's why the kitchen feels like a sauna and you're both breathing like you just ran a marathon. Grandpa, Jake warned. Oh, don't mind me, Harold said, waving his hand dismissively. I just came to tell you that Margaret Henderson called. She's bringing her famous apple pie tonight, and she wanted to make sure it wouldn't conflict with dessert. That's very thoughtful, Chloe said, her professional composure returning. I was planning chocolate tart with berry compote, but I can adjust if needed. Nonsense. We'll have both. More dessert is never a bad thing. Harold winked at Jake. Speaking of sweet things, Jake, why don't you show Chloe the garden? She might want to pick some fresh herbs for tonight. Jake looked at Chloe, who nodded with a smile. That sounds lovely. I'd love to see what you have growing. Great. You two go have fun. I'll watch the stove, Harold said, already shooing them toward the door. Are you sure you know how to? Chloe began. My dear girl, I've been cooking longer than you've been alive. Go. Enjoy the sunshine. Jake and Chloe exchanged glances, then burst into laughter at Harold's obvious matchmaking attempt. He's about as subtle as a freight train, Jake said as they stepped out into the garden. I think it's sweet, Chloe replied, then looked around and gasped. Oh my God, Jake, this is beautiful. The Morrison family garden was Harold's pride and joy. 3 acres of perfectly maintained flowers, herbs, and vegetables, arranged in a design that had been featured in Garden and Home magazine. Stone pathways wound between raised beds, bursting with late-season tomatoes, herbs, and flowers. An antique gazebo sat in the center, surrounded by climbing roses that filled the air with their sweet fragrance. Grandpa's been working on this for 40 years, Jake said, watching Chloe's face light up with delight. He says it's his masterpiece. It's like something out of a fairy tale, Chloe breathed, walking down the main path. Look at these herbs. Is that rosemary? And thyme? Oh, and basil. She moved from plant to plant with the enthusiasm of a child in a candy store, and Jake found himself falling a little deeper with each expression of wonder that crossed her face. Take whatever you need, he said. Grandpa would be thrilled to know his herbs are going into tonight's dinner. Are you sure? Chloe asked, already mentally planning which herbs would complement the salmon. I'm sure. Besides, I have a feeling this garden has been waiting for someone like you to appreciate it properly. Chloe looked at him over a particularly fragrant patch of oregano. Someone like me? Someone who understands that the best things in life are grown with care, tended with patience, and shared with the people you... Jake stopped, realizing what he'd been about to say. The people you... What? Chloe asked softly, moving closer to him. The people you care about, Jake finished, his voice barely above a whisper. They stood there in the garden, surrounded by the scent of herbs and flowers, the afternoon sun casting everything in golden light. Jake felt like he was in a dream, like this perfect moment couldn't possibly be real. I should probably get back to the kitchen, Chloe said, but she didn't move. Probably, Jake agreed, also not moving. Your grandfather's dinner party guests will be arriving in a few hours. They will. And I still have a lot of cooking to do. You do? But neither of them moved. They stood there in the garden, looking at each other like they were trying to memorize every detail of this moment. Jake, Chloe said finally. Yeah? This is crazy, right? This feeling. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Completely crazy. Good, Chloe said, smiling. I was worried it was just me. Definitely not just you, Jake said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture sent shivers through both of them. We should go back, Chloe said, but her voice lacked conviction. We should, Jake agreed, stepping closer instead of farther away. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. Jake had kissed plenty of women in his life, but none of those kisses had felt like this, like everything depended on it, like the whole world was holding its breath. Jake! Chloe! The smoke alarm is going off! Harold's panicked voice shattered the moment. and they both sprinted back toward the house, laughing despite themselves. "So much for romantic moments," Jake said as they burst through the kitchen door to find Harold waving a dish towel at the smoke detector. "I may have gotten a little distracted," Harold admitted sheepishly. "The risotto might be, well, let's call it extra crispy." Chloe surveyed the damage with the calm efficiency of a professional chef. "It's fine. I can fix this. Jake, can you open the windows? Mr. Morrison, maybe you could make some tea for us." "Of course, my dear. Anything to help." As they worked together to salvage the risotto and clear the smoke from the kitchen, Jake watched Chloe handle the minor crisis with grace and humor. She didn't get flustered, didn't blame Harold for the accident, just rolled up her sleeves and got to work. "You're amazing," he said quietly as she stirred the rescued risotto. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, but he could see the pleased smile she was trying to hide. "No, you're not. You're going above and beyond, and you're doing it with kindness and patience. That's not just professional. That's who you are." Chloe looked at him, and Jake saw something shift in her expression. "Thank you," she said simply, but he heard all the things she wasn't saying. "No," Jake said, moving to stand beside her at the stove. "Thank you. For what?" "For reminding me what it feels like to be excited about something again. For making me remember that the best things in life aren't planned, they just happen." Chloe's breath caught. "Jake, I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "I know we just met this morning, but I can't stop thinking about you, about this, about us." "There's an us?" Chloe asked, and Jake couldn't tell if she was teasing or serious. "I'd like there to be," he said honestly. "If you want there to be." Before Chloe could answer, Harold cleared his throat from the doorway. "Not to interrupt another romantic moment, but it's 4 o'clock. Don't we have a dinner party to prepare for?" Jake and Chloe looked at each other and burst into laughter. "He's right," Chloe said, her cheeks pink. "We should focus on tonight." "Right," Jake agreed, though he was already thinking about what would happen after tonight. "Tonight first. Then we can figure out everything else." "Everything else," Chloe repeated, and Jake loved the way she said it, like it was a promise. As they returned to their cooking, working side by side in perfect harmony, Jake realized that he'd never been happier in his entire life. He'd spent years building a fortune, creating an empire, achieving everything he'd thought he wanted. But none of it compared to this. Standing in his grandfather's kitchen, cooking dinner with a woman who made him believe in magic again. The dinner party was going to be perfect. But more importantly, Jake had a feeling that everything that came after was going to be even better. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the dining room as Jake adjusted his navy suit jacket for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Through the kitchen door, he could hear Chloe giving last-minute instructions to the serving staff she'd brought, her voice calm and professional despite the controlled chaos of final preparations. "Stop fidgeting, boy," Harold said, appearing beside him in an impeccably tailored tuxedo that made him look like a distinguished gentleman rather than the eccentric grandfather who'd shot at furniture that morning. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad instead of a dinner party." "I'm not nervous about the dinner party," Jake muttered, straightening his tie. "Of course you're not. You're nervous about her." Harold's knowing smile made Jake's stomach flip. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Jake Morrison, I've known you since you were in diapers. I know exactly what you're talking about, and more importantly, I know that look in your eyes." Harold clapped him on the shoulder. "It's the same look your father had when he met your mother." Before Jake could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Chloe emerged, and every thought in his head evaporated. Gone was the casual chef in her work clothes. In her place stood a vision in a simple black dress that hugged her curves perfectly. Her blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She'd traded her chef's coat for understated jewelry and heels that made her legs look endless. "Wow," Jake breathed, unable to form more coherent words. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Chloe said. her cheeks flushing pink as she took in his appearance. Very handsome. Very handsome indeed, Harold agreed with a theatrical sigh. If I were 40 years younger. Grandpa, Jake warned, but he was smiling. The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of the first guests. Harold rubbed his hands together with glee. Showtime! Jake, you're on greeting duty. Chloe, my dear, you're a guest tonight, not the help. I won't hear any arguments. But Mr. Morrison, I should supervise. The staff knows what they're doing, and dinner won't be served for another hour. You've done the hard work. Now comes the fun part. Harold winked at Jake. Besides, I have a feeling my grandson would very much like to show you off to everyone. Jake felt his face burn, but he couldn't deny the truth of Harold's words. He's right. I'd be honored to have you as my date tonight. Your date? Chloe asked, her eyebrows raised. If you'll have me, Jake said, extending his arm to her. Chloe looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, that radiant smile that never failed to make his heart skip. I'd love to. The evening that followed was pure magic. Jake had attended hundreds of formal dinners in his life, but none had felt like this. With Chloe beside him, everything seemed brighter, more interesting, more alive. She charmed Harold's friends effortlessly, listening with genuine interest to Margaret Henderson's stories about her late husband's war service, laughing at Frank Wilson's terrible jokes, and somehow managing to make even the most curmudgeonly member of the Historical Society crack a smile. She's wonderful, whispered Eleanor Hartwell, Harold's oldest friend, as they watched Chloe help Margaret with her shawl. Where did you find her? She found me, Jake said honestly, watching Chloe with wonder. I'm still not sure how I got so lucky. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, Eleanor said with a knowing smile. Your grandfather's been talking about you finding someone special for years. I think he's quite pleased with himself for orchestrating this. Jake glanced at Harold, who was regaling a group of guests with an obviously embellished story about his morning pigeon hunting incident. He didn't orchestrate anything. He just created the opportunity. Smart man, your grandfather, always has been. As dinner was served, Jake marveled at how perfectly everything flowed. The herb-crusted salmon was cooked to perfection, the risotto was creamy and flavorful, and the roasted vegetables were a work of art. But more than the food, it was the atmosphere Chloe had created. Warm, elegant, and inviting. This is incredible, said Dr. Patterson, the Society's president. Where did you find this caterer, Harold? Actually, Harold said, standing with his wine glass, I'd like to propose a toast to Chloe Bennett, who not only saved us from my cooking but brought something even more precious into our home tonight. Jake looked at Chloe, who was blushing furiously as all eyes turned to her. To new friends, Harold continued, and to the magic that happens when the right people find each other at exactly the right moment. To new friends, the guests echoed, raising their glasses. Jake touched his glass to Chloe's, holding her gaze. To magic, he said quietly, just for her. To magic, she whispered back. After dinner, as the guests moved to the parlor for coffee and Margaret's famous apple pie, Jake found himself alone with Chloe on the terrace overlooking the garden. Thank you, she said, leaning against the stone railing. For what? For making me feel like I belonged in there. For introducing me as your date instead of just the caterer. For... She paused, searching for words. For making me feel special. Jake stepped closer, close enough to smell her perfume in the cool evening air. You are special, Chloe. More special than you know. Jake, she said softly, turning to face him. I need to tell you something. What is it? I'm scared, she admitted. This feeling, this connection between us, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before. It's wonderful and terrifying at the same time. I know, Jake said, reaching out to cup her face gently. I'm scared too. But I'm more scared of walking away from this, from you, than I am of whatever comes next. What if it doesn't work out? What if we're just caught up in the romance of the moment? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. Jake said. But what if it does work out? What if this is the beginning of something incredible? Chloe searched his face in the moonlight. You really believe that? I believe in you, Jake said simply. I believe in us. The sound of a slow jazz melody drifted from the parlor, where someone had started the old record player. Jake held out his hand to Chloe. Dance with me? She took his hand without hesitation, and he pulled her into his arms. They swayed together on the terrace, the music soft and romantic, the stars bright above them. This is like a fairy tale, Chloe murmured against his chest. If it is, I never want to wake up, Jake said, his lips brushing her hair. She pulled back to look at him, and Jake saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, wonder, hope, and something deeper that made his heart race. Jake, she whispered. Yeah? Kiss me. Jake didn't need to be asked twice. He lowered his head and touched his lips to hers, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. The kiss was everything he'd imagined and more, sweet and passionate, tender and desperate all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. That was, he started. Perfect, Chloe finished. I was going to say earth-shattering, but perfect works too. She laughed, the sound like music in the night air. Both, definitely both. They stood there holding each other, swaying slightly to the music still playing inside, and Jake felt like the luckiest man in the world. So what happens now? Chloe asked. Now, Jake said, pressing a kiss to her temple. We see where this takes us. One day at a time, one kiss at a time, one moment at a time. I like that plan, Chloe said, snuggling closer to him. Good, Jake murmured, because I'm not letting you go anytime soon. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the soft glow of the terrace lights and the gentle sounds of the dinner party inside, Jake knew that his life had changed forever. He'd found something he hadn't even known he was looking for. Not just love, but home. 3 weeks after the dinner party, Jake Morrison stood in his Manhattan penthouse office, staring out at the city skyline while his phone buzzed incessantly with business calls he couldn't bring himself to answer. Every fiber of his being wanted to be back in Connecticut, back in Millbrook, back with Chloe. They'd spent every day together since that magical evening, long walks through town, cooking together in Harold's kitchen, quiet moments in the garden where they'd shared their first kiss. Jake had never felt more alive, more complete, more certain about anything in his life. Until yesterday. Sir? His assistant, Marcus, knocked on the door. The investors are here for the quarterly review. Jake straightened his tie and forced himself to focus. Send them in. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of profit margins, expansion plans, and strategic acquisitions. Jake went through the motions, his mind still in Connecticut, still with Chloe. Morrison, barked Richard Blackstone, the lead investor. You seem distracted. This company needs your full attention, especially with the Tokyo deal on the table. Tokyo deal? Jake's attention snapped back to the present. The expansion we discussed last month. 6 months in Japan, setting up the new division. It's worth $50 million minimum. Blackstone leaned forward. We need your answer by Friday. Jake's stomach dropped. 6 months in Japan, away from Chloe, away from the life he'd just started building. I'll need some time to consider. Time. Morrison, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. What could possibly be more important than growing your empire? Jake thought of blonde hair catching morning sunlight, of laughter in a garden, of the way Chloe looked when she cooked with complete focus and passion. I'll let you know by Friday, he said firmly. After the investors left, Jake sat alone in his office, his head in his hands. His phone rang, Chloe's name lighting up the screen, and for the first time in weeks, he hesitated before answering. Hey, beautiful, he said, trying to sound normal. Hey yourself, handsome. How's the big city treating you? Like it always does, cold and demanding. Jake walked to the window again. How's Millbrook? Quiet without you. Your grandfather's been asking when you're coming back. He's planning another dinner party, you know. Says he wants to show off his matchmaking skills to the garden club. Jake smiled despite his mood. Of course he does. Jake, you sound off. Is everything okay? The concern in her voice made his chest tighten. Just work stuff. Nothing I can't handle. Do you want to talk about it? Jake closed his eyes. He wanted to tell her everything. About the Tokyo deal, about the impossible choice he was facing, about how the thought of leaving her made him feel like he was suffocating. But how could he explain that his entire future was built on a foundation that might crumble if he chose love over ambition? It's complicated, he said finally. Try me. I'm pretty good with complicated. Not this complicated. I'll work it out. There was a pause, and Jake could practically hear Chloe's wheels turning. Jake, whatever it is, we can figure it out together. That's what people do when they what? Jake asked, his heart pounding. When they care about each other, Chloe finished softly. Jake wanted to say the words that were burning in his throat. I love you. I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you. I want to build a life with you. Instead, he said, I know. I care about you too. I'll see you tomorrow, Chloe asked. Tomorrow, Jake confirmed, though he wasn't sure how he was going to face her when he hadn't figured out what he was going to do about Tokyo. The next morning, Jake arrived at Harold's house to find Chloe in the kitchen, flour in her hair and a frown on her face as she stared at a tray of what looked like failed soufflés. Rough morning? Jake asked, kissing her cheek. The worst. I have a catering job this weekend, a wedding for 200 people, and I can't get the dessert right. I've been at this for hours. Chloe gestured helplessly at the kitchen, which looked like a bakery had exploded. What's it supposed to be? Chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis. The bride specifically requested it because it's what her grandparents served at their wedding 50 years ago. Chloe's eyes filled with frustrated tears. I've made soufflés 100 times, but something's off. They keep falling. Jake pulled her into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and cinnamon that always clung to her hair. Hey, you're the most talented chef I know. You'll figure it out. What if I don't? What if I ruin their wedding? What if... Chloe. Jake cupped her face in his hands. You're not going to ruin anything. You're amazing at what you do. Sometimes we just have bad days. Like you're having? She asked, studying his face. You look like you haven't slept. Jake sighed, leading her to the kitchen table. I have something to tell you. About work. Chloe's expression grew serious. Okay. My company has been offered a major expansion opportunity in Tokyo. Jake ran his hand through his hair. It's huge, the kind of deal that could double our revenue. That's wonderful, Chloe said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. You must be excited. There's a catch. I'd have to move to Tokyo for 6 months. Minimum. The words hung in the air between them, like a bomb waiting to explode. 6 months, Chloe repeated quietly. Maybe longer. These things have a way of extending. And you're considering it. It wasn't a question, and Jake could hear the hurt creeping into her voice. Chloe, this is my career, my life's work. I can't just what? Just choose happiness over profit margins? Chloe stood up, her professional composure cracking. Just choose the woman you supposedly care about over another zero in your bank account. That's not fair, Jake said, standing too. This isn't about money. This is about everything I've built, everything I've worked for. And what about everything we've built? What about us? We've known each other for 3 weeks. The moment the words left his mouth, Jake wanted to take them back. Chloe's face went pale and she took a step back as if he'd slapped her. 3 weeks, she said slowly. Right. Silly me. Thinking that 3 weeks of falling in love with you might actually mean something. Chloe, I didn't mean... No, you're right. 3 weeks is nothing in the grand scheme of building an empire, is it? Chloe's voice was steady now, but Jake could see the tears threatening to spill. Clearly, I misunderstood what this was. You didn't misunderstand anything. What we have is real, it's just not real enough to factor into major life decisions, apparently. Jake felt panic rising in his chest. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I have responsibilities, obligations, to everyone but me. That's not true, isn't it? Chloe crossed her arms, and Jake recognized the defensive gesture. You made this decision without even talking to me about it. You were planning to just, what? Break up with me before you left? String me along until you got bored? I haven't made any decision yet. Haven't you? Chloe's voice broke slightly. Jake, if you have to think about whether I'm worth more than a business deal, then you've already decided. The kitchen fell silent, except for the timer on the oven, marking the failure of another batch of soufflés. I should go, Chloe said quietly, untying her apron. Chloe, wait. No, Jake. I need to think. We both do. She looked at him with eyes full of unshed tears. I thought I'd found someone who saw me as more than just a pleasant distraction. I thought I'd found someone who understood that love is about building something together, not just taking what you want when it's convenient. You did find that person, Jake said desperately. You found me. Did I? Because the man I fell in love with wouldn't have to think twice about choosing me over money. The man I fell in love with would have included me in this decision, would have asked me to wait for him, would have found a way to make it work. Jake opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. Because she was right. He had made his decision the moment he'd started weighing profit margins against her smile. I'm sorry, he said quietly. So am I, Chloe whispered, and then she was gone, leaving Jake alone in the kitchen with the smell of burned dreams and the sound of his own heart breaking. Harold appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, taking in the scene with wise eyes. Well, he said mildly, that could have gone better. I screwed up, Jake said, slumping into a chair. Yes, you did. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Jake looked at his grandfather, at the man who'd taught him that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or sold or leveraged for profit. I don't know, he admitted. Yes, you do, Harold said gently. You've always known. You're just scared to admit it. What if I choose her and it doesn't work out? What if I give up everything for love and end up with nothing? Harold sat down across from him, his expression serious. Jake, I've lived 78 years on this earth. I've seen fortunes made and lost, empires built and crumbled, but I've never seen anything more valuable than a person who loves you for who you are, not what you can give them. But my company will survive without you for 6 months. We'll probably thrive with someone else making the decisions for a while. Harold reached across the table and covered Jake's hand with his own. But Jake, that girl upstairs, she might not survive losing you. And more importantly, you might not survive losing her. Jake closed his eyes, finally admitting what he'd known since the moment Chloe walked out that door. I love her, Grandpa. I know you do, son. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Jake Morrison had never been more terrified in his life, and he'd once given a presentation to the board of directors of Apple with a hangover and 2 hours of sleep. But standing outside the Millbrook Community Center at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, watching through the window as Chloe directed the setup for the Henderson-Wilson wedding, he felt like he might actually throw up. It had been 5 days since their fight. 5 days of unanswered calls, unreturned texts, and the most miserable existence Jake had ever experienced. He'd tried to focus on work, tried to convince himself that maybe the Tokyo deal was the right choice, tried to pretend that losing Chloe was just a bump in the road of his perfectly planned life. He'd lasted exactly 36 hours before calling Richard Blackstone and telling him to find someone else for Tokyo. You're making a mistake, Morrison, Blackstone had warned. Love is temporary. Business is forever. You're wrong, Jake had replied, watching Harold tend his garden from the kitchen window. Love is the only thing that lasts forever. Business is just what we do while we're waiting for something real. Now, armed with the most important presentation of his life and a plan that was either brilliantly romantic or completely insane, Jake took a deep breath and walked into the community center. Chloe looked up from the centerpiece she was arranging, and Jake felt his heart stop. She was wearing a simple blue dress that made her eyes look like sapphires, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she was more beautiful than he remembered. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Jake," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here? I need to talk to you. I'm working." Chloe turned back to the flowers, but Jake could see the way her hands trembled slightly. "The wedding starts in 4 hours, and I still have—" "I turned down Tokyo." Chloe's hands stilled. "What?" "I turned down the Tokyo deal. Yesterday. I called Blackstone and told him to find someone else." "Why would you do that?" Chloe asked, still not looking at him. "Because I'm an idiot who almost lost the best thing that ever happened to him for a bunch of zeros in a bank account." "Jake." "No. Let me finish. Please." Jake stepped closer, his heart pounding. "You were right. About everything. I made that decision without including you because I was scared. Scared that if I let myself believe this was real, if I let myself count on you, I'd lose everything I'd worked for. And now? Now I realize that I already had everything I'd worked for. It was just sitting in a kitchen in Connecticut, making soufflés and arguing with my grandfather about the proper way to fold napkins." Chloe finally turned to face him, and Jake could see the tears she was fighting back. "You don't get to do this, Jake. You don't get to walk in here and say the right words and expect everything to be okay. I know. I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel like you weren't important enough to factor into my life decisions. And I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to fix that. Then why are you here?" Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "Because I need you to see this." Chloe frowned, taking the phone. Her eyes widened as she read. "Jake, this is a business plan. For a restaurant. Not just any restaurant. Your restaurant. Delicias de Chloe." Jake's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "I've been working on it for the past 3 days. The location, the financing, the marketing plan. Everything. There's a perfect space available in downtown Millbrook, right next to the bookstore. It has a view of the park, and the kitchen is exactly what you described when you told me about your dream restaurant. Jake, I can't." "You can. And you should. Because you're the most talented chef I've ever met, and you deserve to have your own place, your own menu, your own everything." Jake took her hands in his. "I want to invest in your dream, Chloe. Not as a business partner, not as someone who expects anything in return, but as someone who believes in you completely." "This is crazy," Chloe whispered, staring at the detailed plans on his phone. This is everything I've ever wanted." "I know. I spent 2 days researching every detail about you, about your cooking, about your dreams. I called every restaurant you've ever worked at, every client you've ever catered for. Do you know what they all said?" "What?" "That you're extraordinary, that you have a gift, that you light up every room you enter and make everyone around you want to be better." Jake's voice cracked slightly. "And that some lucky bastard is going to realize how amazing you are and never let you go." Chloe was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, I want to be that lucky bastard, Chloe. I want to be the man who gets to watch you build your empire, who gets to celebrate your successes and help you through the failures. I want to be the man who comes home to you every night and wakes up next to you every morning. What about your company? Your life in New York? I can run my company from anywhere. The beauty of technology is that it connects people across distances, remember? And as for my life in New York," Jake smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I don't have a life in New York. I have an apartment and an office and a bunch of stuff that doesn't matter. My life is wherever you are. But what if it doesn't work out? What if the restaurant fails? What if we fail? Then we'll fail together. And we'll pick ourselves up and try again. Together. Because that's what people do when they love each other. Chloe's breath caught. Love? I love you, Chloe Bennett. I love your laugh and your determination, and the way you get flour in your hair when you're concentrating. I love how you make everyone around you feel special, how you turn simple ingredients into magic, how you made me believe in something bigger than profit margins and market share. I love you too, Chloe whispered. But Jake, I'm scared. This is all so big, so fast. I know. But some things are worth being scared about. Jake pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Chloe's eyes went wide. I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. But I'm asking you to take a leap of faith with me. To believe that what we have is real and worth fighting for. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant promise ring. A thin band with a single small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires. This is a promise that I will never make another major life decision without you. A promise that I will choose you every day for as long as you'll have me. A promise that I will support your dreams and build a life with you that's better than anything either of us could create alone. Chloe stared at the ring, then at Jake's face, then back at the ring. You're absolutely insane. Completely. This is the most ridiculous, over-the-top romantic gesture I've ever seen. I was going for memorable. And if I say no, then I'll respect that. But I'll also spend the rest of my life trying to prove that I'm worthy of a second chance. Chloe looked around the community center, at the half-decorated tables and the flowers waiting to be arranged, at the wedding she was supposed to be preparing for. Then she looked back at Jake, at the man who'd turned his entire life upside down for her. The wedding, she said weakly, is in 4 hours, and you have an entire staff to help you. Plus, I happen to know that the bride specifically requested your chocolate soufflé for dessert, and I also happen to know that you figured out what was wrong with the recipe yesterday. How could you possibly know that? Harold told me. He's been keeping tabs on you. He's very invested in our relationship. Of course he has. Chloe laughed through her tears. That meddling old romantic. He learned from the best. So what do you say? Will you take a leap of faith with me? Chloe looked at the ring again, then at the business plan on his phone, then at Jake's face. Open, vulnerable, hopeful. Ask me properly, she said softly. Jake's heart soared. He got down on one knee right there in the middle of the community center, surrounded by wedding decorations and the promise of someone else's happy ending. Chloe Bennett, will you let me love you for the rest of my life? Will you build something beautiful with me? Will you take this promise ring and all the promises that come with it? Yes, Chloe whispered, then louder. Yes. Yes to all of it. Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. I can't believe you did all this, she said when he finally set her down. I can't believe I almost lost you for a business deal. You didn't lose me. I was waiting for you to realize what was important. And what's that? This, Chloe said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. Us, love, the courage to choose happiness over security. I love you, Jake murmured against her lips. I love you too. Now help me finish decorating this wedding so we can start planning our own. Our own. Well, not immediately, but someday, when we're ready, when we've built something beautiful together. Jake grinned, rolling up his sleeves. I can't wait. As they worked together to transform the community center into a wedding wonderland, Jake realized that he'd never been happier. He'd given up a $50 million deal and didn't regret it for a second. Because he'd gained something infinitely more valuable. A future with the woman he loved. A partnership built on trust and shared dreams. And the knowledge that sometimes the biggest risk in life is not taking one at all. 1 year later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the bridal suite at the Millbrook Country Club, casting everything in a golden glow that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Chloe Bennett, soon to be Chloe Morrison, stood before the full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman staring back at her. Her wedding dress was a vision in ivory silk and delicate lace, with a flowing train that pooled behind her like spilled moonlight. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, with soft tendrils framing her face, and tiny pearl pins scattered throughout like stars. But it wasn't the dress or the hair or the makeup that made her glow. It was pure, unadulterated happiness. "Oh, sweetheart," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face as she entered the room. "You look absolutely breathtaking." "Don't cry, Mom. You'll make me cry, and then my makeup will be ruined," Chloe laughed, though her own eyes were already misty. "I can't help it. You look just like I did on my wedding day. Your father would have been so proud." Chloe squeezed her mother's hand, thinking of the man who'd taught her to dream big and love fearlessly, even though she'd lost him too young. "He's here, Mom. I can feel him." A knock on the door interrupted their moment. "Ladies, it's Harold. May I come in?" "Of course," Chloe called, and Harold Morrison entered the room in his role as the father of the bride, a position he'd accepted with tears of joy and a promise to walk her down the aisle with all the pride and love her own father would have shown. "My dear girl," Harold said, his voice thick with emotion as he took in her appearance. "You are absolutely radiant. Jake is going to take one look at you and forget how to breathe." "How is he? Is he nervous?" "Nervous? The boy's been pacing the groom's quarters like a caged tiger for the past hour. I had to threaten to tie him to a chair." Harold chuckled, adjusting his boutonniere. "Though I must say, I've never seen him happier. You've changed him, Chloe. Made him remember what truly matters in life." Chloe's heart swelled. The past year had been a whirlwind of joy, growth, and dreams coming true. Her restaurant, Delicias de Chloe, had opened 6 months ago to rave reviews and a waiting list that stretched 2 months out. Jake had been true to his word, supporting her vision while building his own company's East Coast headquarters right here in Millbrook. They'd created something beautiful together, a life, a future, a love that grew stronger every day. "Are you ready, my dear?" Harold asked, offering his arm. "More than ready," Chloe replied, taking one last look in the mirror. "Let's go marry your grandson." The ceremony was being held in Harold's garden, transformed into a fairy tale setting with hundreds of white roses, twinkling lights strung through the trees, and an altar made of ivy, and baby's breath positioned beneath the old gazebo, where Jake and Chloe had shared so many quiet moments over the past year. As the string quartet began the opening notes of Canon in D, the guests rose to their feet. There were familiar faces everywhere, the members of the historical society who'd witnessed their first dance, colleagues from both their worlds, and friends who'd watched their love story unfold with joy and anticipation. But when the music changed to the wedding march and Chloe appeared at the top of the garden path, Jake saw nothing but her. She moved toward him like a vision, her dress flowing around her as she walked arm in arm with Harold, her smile so radiant it could have powered the entire state of Connecticut. Jake felt his breath catch, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "This is really happening," he thought. "I'm marrying the woman of my dreams." When they reached the altar, Harold placed Chloe's hand in Jake's, with a paternal kiss on her cheek and a whispered, "Take care of each other." "Always," Jake promised, his eyes never leaving Chloe's face. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. They'd written their own vows, and when the time came, Jake took Chloe's hands and spoke from his heart. "Chloe," he began, his voice strong despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "A year ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I had plans, goals, a perfectly organized life that made sense on paper. Then you walked into my grandfather's kitchen and turned my world upside down in the most beautiful way possible." Chloe squeezed his hands, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "You taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing life. It's about finding someone worth building a completely new life with. You taught me that success isn't measured in bank accounts or business deals, but in moments of joy shared with the person who makes your heart race every single day. Jake paused, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was promising. I promise to choose you every day in every decision for the rest of my life. I promise to support your dreams, even when they're bigger than mine. I promise to dance with you in the kitchen, to taste every new recipe, and to never, ever take for granted the miracle of being loved by you. You are my heart, my home, my forever. I love you, Chloe Bennett, and I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life showing you how much. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden, including Chloe's. Jake, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. You say I turned your world upside down, but the truth is, you turned mine right side up. Before you, I was so focused on survival that I forgot to dream about thriving. You didn't just believe in my dreams. You helped me remember that I deserved to chase them. She took a shaky breath, gathering herself. You chose me over a $50 million deal. But more importantly, you choose me every day in 100 small ways. You choose me when you taste my experimental recipes and pretend they're delicious, even when they're disasters. You choose me when you drive across town just to bring me coffee during a busy lunch rush. You choose me when you hold me after a hard day and remind me that I'm stronger than I think. Chloe's voice grew stronger, more confident. I promise to choose you too, in big ways and small ones. I promise to build a life with you that's filled with laughter, adventure, and really good food. I promise to support your dreams, to celebrate your successes, and to remind you of your worth when you forget. I promise to love you fiercely, completely, and without reservation for all the days of my life. You are my person, Jake Morrison, and I am so proud to become your wife. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jake cupped Chloe's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love, joy, and promise their future held. The garden erupted in cheers and applause, but all Jake could hear was the sound of his own heart singing. Mrs. Morrison, he whispered against her lips. I like the sound of that, Chloe whispered back. The reception was held on the terrace overlooking the garden, with tables arranged under strings of lights that made everything look magical. The menu was, naturally, entirely created by Chloe and her team, featuring elevated versions of comfort food that had guests raving between courses. Harold's toast was the highlight of the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, standing with his champagne glass raised high. Most people think that at my age you've seen everything there is to see, but this past year has proven me wrong in the most delightful way. He looked at Jake and Chloe, seated at the head table with their hands intertwined. I've watched two people who were clearly meant for each other find their way through pride, fear, and the occasional kitchen disaster to something truly beautiful. I've watched my grandson remember that life isn't about what you accumulate, but who you share it with. And I've watched this remarkable young woman turn our house into a home and our family into something richer than I ever imagined. Harold's voice grew thick with emotion. Jake, your parents would be so proud of the man you've become. Chloe, you've brought light and laughter into our lives in ways you'll never fully understand. Together, you give me hope that love really can conquer all, that kindness still matters, and that the best stories are the ones that start with, I never expected this to happen. He raised his glass higher. To Jake and Chloe Morrison, may your love story continue to inspire everyone lucky enough to witness it. May your kitchen always be full of laughter, your hearts always be full of hope, and your lives always be full of each other. Cheers! The crowd erupted in applause and cheers of cheers as Jake stood to hug his grandfather, his eyes bright with unshed tears. As the evening continued, Jake and Chloe moved through their reception like they were floating on air. They danced to their song, the same jazz melody that had played during their first dance on Harold's terrace, while their guests watched with smiles and knowing looks. So, Jake murmured as they swayed together, any regrets about marrying a man who once chose business over you? Just one, Chloe said, pulling back to look at him with sparkling eyes. Jake's face fell. What? I regret that it took us 3 whole weeks to figure out we were meant for each other. We could have had an extra 3 weeks of this happiness. Jake's grin was so bright it could have lit up the entire terrace. Well, Mrs. Morrison, we have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time. The rest of our lives, Chloe repeated like she was tasting the words. I love the sound of that. Good, Jake said, spinning her around as the music swelled. Because forever starts today. Epilogue. 5 years later. The sound of children's laughter filled the garden as 3-year-old Emma Morrison chased butterflies while her baby brother Thomas napped in his stroller under the shade of the gazebo. Chloe watched from the kitchen window, one hand resting on her growing belly. Baby number 3 was due in the fall. Delicious de Chloe had become the most sought-after restaurant in Connecticut, with a cookbook deal and a Food Network special under Chloe's belt. Jake's company had grown exponentially, but he'd kept his promise to build a life that prioritized family over profit margins. Penny for your thoughts, Jake said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. Just thinking about how perfect this all is, Chloe said, leaning back against his chest. 5 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be living in a mansion in Connecticut with a husband who loves me, 2 beautiful children, a 3rd on the way, and my dream career, I'd have thought they were crazy. And if someone had told me that the best decision I'd ever make would be choosing love over a business deal, I'd have had them committed, Jake laughed, pressing a kiss to her neck. No regrets? Chloe asked, though she already knew the answer. Only one, Jake said, echoing her words from their wedding night. What's that? That I can't go back and tell my younger self to stop being such an idiot and marry you immediately. Chloe turned in his arms, her face glowing with happiness and pregnancy and pure contentment. I love you, Jake Morrison. I love you too, Chloe Morrison. Forever and always. Outside, Harold appeared in the garden, immediately becoming the target of Emma's exuberant hugs. At 83, he was still spry enough to chase grandchildren, and wise enough to appreciate every moment of the beautiful chaos his matchmaking had created. As Jake and Chloe watched their family through the window, they knew that this love, this life, this perfectly imperfect happiness was worth more than all the business deals and restaurant empires in the world. Sometimes the best things in life really did start with a simple dinner party and a grandfather with excellent aim and even better timing. The end.